The impact sounded like a gunshot, but heavier, wetter, a violent crunch that seemed to split the quiet suburban street in half, as the black SUV jumped the curb and plowed straight through the white picket fence, shards of wood exploding outward like bone fragments, and slammed nose first into the side of the Miller family's house, just beneath the kitchen window, where seconds earlier, Emily Miller had been rinsing a coffee mug, her hands still dripping when the entire wall shuddered and cracked, plaster dust raining down into the sink as she stumbled backward, heart hammering so violently she could feel it in her throat, her ears ringing, and for a moment she thought absurdly that an earthquake had hit Chicago, that somehow the ground itself had turned against them, until the smell reached her, sharp and chemical, burning rubber mixed with gasoline, and then the screaming started outside. Neighbors shouting, a dog barking frantically, someone yelling, "Call 911," while Emily stood frozen, her brain lagging behind reality, trying to process the impossible shape now embedded halfway into her home, the SUV's engine still roaring like a wounded animal, the front end crumpled, steam hissing from under the hood. She dropped the mug without noticing it shatter and moved forward, slow at first, like she was underwater, each step heavy, uncertain, until she reached the shattered window and looked down, and that's when she saw him. The driver slumped over the wheel, blood smeared across the deployed airbag, his face partially obscured but unmistakably familiar, and her stomach twisted violently as recognition slammed into her harder than the crash itself. "No," she whispered, the word barely forming, her lips trembling, because it couldn't be him. It didn't make sense. Not here. Not like this. But it was Detective Marcus Hale, the man who had interrogated her just 3 days ago, the man who had looked her dead in the eye and asked if she was lying about the night her husband disappeared. The sirens arrived before she could move again, distant at first and then rapidly closing in. Red and blue lights flickering across the broken walls of her kitchen, painting everything in frantic pulses as neighbors gathered at a cautious distance, their voices overlapping in speculation and fear, while Emily stood rooted to the spot, her breathing shallow, her hands shaking uncontrollably as a paramedic shouted, "We've got a driver unconscious, possible internal bleeding," and another voice barked, "We need to stabilize him now, get the jaws." And Emily's mind spiraled, fragments of memory colliding the interrogation room. Marcus Hale leaning forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Mrs. Miller, people don't just vanish without a trace, unless someone wants them to." The way his eyes had lingered on her just a second too long, like he already knew something she didn't, or worse, something she was trying to hide, and now he was here, crashing into her house like some grotesque message. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," a firefighter said, his gloved hand gently but firmly guiding her away from the broken window, and she let herself be moved, her body responding automatically while her mind refused to catch up, and as she stepped outside onto the front lawn, the cool evening air hit her skin, carrying with it the smell of cut grass and gasoline and something metallic blood, and she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold in the rising panic. A neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, approached cautiously, her face pale, eyes wide. "Emily, are you okay? Oh my God, what happened?" Emily opened her mouth but no words came out, just a strained breath, because how could she explain something she didn't understand herself? How could she say that the man investigating her missing husband had just crashed into her house like he was trying to break in, or send a warning? Or... She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. I don't know," she managed, her voice thin, almost unrecognizable to her own ears. He came out of nowhere." The paramedics were working fast now, cutting through the crumpled metal, the screech of hydraulic tools slicing through the night as sparks flew, and Emily couldn't look away, even though every instinct told her to, because there was something wrong, something deeply, fundamentally off about this. And her eyes fixed on Marcus Hale's face as they pulled him free, his head lolling to the side, his skin too pale under the flashing lights, and for a split second, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused but searching, and she felt it a direct, unmistakable connection, as his gaze locked onto hers. His lips moved barely, and she leaned forward instinctively, her heart racing, trying to catch the words, and she thought she heard him say something, a single word, hoarse and broken. "Run," the paramedic shouted. "Stay with me, sir. Stay with me." But Marcus's eyes rolled back, his body going limp again as they loaded him onto the stretcher, and Emily's mind seized on that one word, replaying it over and over, "Run, run, run," like a warning echoing through her skull. And suddenly, the fear that had been simmering beneath the surface surged into something sharper, more focused, because if Marcus Hale had risked everything to get here, to crash into her house, to tell her to run, then whatever he had been investigating, whatever had happened to her husband, was far worse than she had allowed herself to believe. The police began to secure the scene. Officers moving with practiced efficiency, taking statements, setting up barriers, and one of them approached her, a tall man with a stern expression and a notepad already in hand. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Reynolds. I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." Emily nodded automatically, her mind still racing, but as she followed him a few steps away from the chaos, she felt a creeping awareness settle in. Something cold and heavy, because this was no longer just about a car crash. This was about her missing husband, about the detective who had been digging into her life and had now ended up half dead in her front yard. And she realized, with a sinking certainty, that whatever came next, she was no longer just a witness. She was at the center of it. Reynolds flipped open his notepad, his pen poised. "Can you tell me what you saw?" Emily hesitated, her gaze drifting back to the ambulance as its doors slammed shut, the siren wailing to life as it sped away, carrying Marcus Hale into the unknown. And she felt that word again, pressing against her thoughts like a command she couldn't ignore. Run. But she didn't run. Not yet. Instead, she took a shaky breath and began to speak, her voice steadier than she felt, recounting the crash in careful, measured detail, leaving out the part where Marcus had spoken, where he had looked at her like he knew something she didn't, because some instinct told her that not everything should be said out loud. Not yet. And as she talked, she became acutely aware of the eyes on her, not just Reynolds, but others, officers moving around the perimeter, neighbors watching from behind police tape, and somewhere in that crowd, she felt it. A presence, subtle but undeniable, like someone was observing her with a level of interest that went beyond curiosity, and her skin prickled as she glanced around, trying to pinpoint it. But everyone looked the same, concerned, nosy, frightened, and yet the feeling didn't go away. When she finished, Reynolds nodded, jotting down a few final notes. "All right. We may need to follow up with you later. In the meantime, I'd suggest you find somewhere else to stay tonight. This place isn't exactly safe right now." Emily let out a hollow laugh, the sound brittle. "Yeah, no kidding." He gave her a sympathetic look, then moved off to speak with another officer, leaving her standing there, alone on the edge of her own shattered life. And as the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion crept in, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it, something else was taking shape, a determination, fragile but growing, because she couldn't ignore this, couldn't pretend it was just a random accident. Not when Marcus Hale had shown up like that, not when he had told her to run, and as she turned back toward the house, toward the gaping hole in her kitchen wall, she knew, with a clarity that cut through the chaos, that whatever answers she had been avoiding, whatever truths she had been too afraid to face, they were coming for her now, whether she was ready or not. And somewhere, buried under the fear and confusion, a darker thought surfaced, one she didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't push away. What if her husband hadn't just disappeared? What if someone had made him disappear? And what if she had been standing right next to that someone all along, without even realizing it? The night stretched on, the flashing lights eventually dimming as the scene cleared, but the damage remained, a physical and emotional rupture that would not be easily repaired. And as Emily finally stepped inside what was left of her home, the silence hit her like another kind of impact, heavy and oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of traffic. And she moved through the space slowly, her fingers brushing against familiar surfaces now coated in dust and debris, her mind replaying everything, searching for patterns, for meaning, for anything that could explain how her life had unraveled so quickly. And when she reached the kitchen, she stopped, staring at the jagged opening where the wall used to be, the night air seeping in, carrying with it a chill that settled deep in her bones, and she wrapped her arms around herself again, trying to hold on to something, anything, that felt solid, but all she could think about was that word, echoing louder now, more urgent, as if it were the only truth she could trust. Run, run. The word kept moving through her like a pulse that didn't belong to her body, as if Marcus Hale had lodged it somewhere under her ribs before the ambulance doors closed, and now it was beating there, steady and invasive, making every sound in the ruined kitchen feel louder, every shadow deeper, every ordinary object suddenly suspect. Emily stood very still in the cold draft, spilling through the torn side of the house, and tried to force herself into practical thoughts, into the kind of small, manageable tasks people were supposed to do after disasters. Call insurance, pack a bag, find a hotel, text her sister. But her mind slid away from those things and returned instead to the details that didn't fit. Marcus was a homicide detective, not a drunk teenager joyriding through a neighborhood. He had questioned her on Monday in a gray interview room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial cleaner. He had been controlled then, methodical, maybe too sharp, but not reckless. Men like Marcus Hale did not accidentally drive into the house of a woman connected to an active missing person case. And men like that definitely did not use their last coherent breath to tell her to run unless there was something specific, immediate, and bad enough to strip away procedure. She swallowed and looked toward the hallway, where family photos still hung straight on the wall, as if the house itself had only partially accepted reality. There was one from 2 summers ago at Lake Geneva, she and Ben on a rented pontoon boat, sunburned and smiling, their daughter Sophie squeezed between them with wet braids and a gap-toothed grin. Emily's eyes caught on Ben's face and held there longer than she meant them to. For the last 11 days, she had been living inside 2 contradictory truths, and the strain of carrying both had been tearing her apart. Truth 1. Her husband was missing. Truth 2. Some mean, private part of her had not been entirely surprised when he disappeared. Not because she wanted him gone. Not because she had done anything to him. But because, for months before he vanished, Ben had been drifting into a version of himself she no longer understood. A tense, distracted, secretive man who answered direct questions with soft lies and kissed her forehead like a husband playing a husband on television. Emily had hated herself for noticing the relief hidden inside her fear, hated the tiny pocket of quiet that had arrived with his absence, hated even more that Marcus Hale had seemed to sense it. She rubbed both hands over her face, then crouched to pick up her purse from where it had fallen beside the kitchen island. Her fingers trembled as she sifted through the contents: wallet, keys, lip balm, school pickup receipts, a crumpled list for groceries she'd never bought. Then her hand hit something unfamiliar in the outside pocket. A phone, not hers. Cheap, black, screen cracked in one corner. She stared at it, frowning, trying to think, and then memory flickered back. The paramedics hauling Marcus past her lawn, one of them bumping her shoulder, the detective's jacket half off one arm, objects sliding loose from his coat pocket onto the grass. Had she picked this up without realizing it? Her chest tightened. The phone was dark. She pressed the side button. Battery at 6%. No lock screen photo. No notifications except one missed call from a number saved only as D. And then, before she could think better of it, the phone buzzed in her hand with such sudden violence she almost dropped it. Incoming call. D. Emily stared at the screen while fear lifted coldly up her spine. The phone kept vibrating. Whoever D was, they were persistent. She looked toward the broken wall, toward the street beyond it where police lights no longer flashed, toward the front windows where any neighbor might still be peeking through blinds. Her thumb hovered over the green icon. Every instinct told her not to answer. Another instinct, thinner but harder, told her ignorance was no longer protecting her. She swiped. "Hello?" she whispered. For a second, there was only static and the hollow noise of a bad connection. Then a male voice, low and hurried. "Marcus?" Emily didn't answer. Her mouth went dry. The man on the line exhaled sharply. "Listen to me. If you're not Marcus, don't say his name. Don't say your name either. Just tell me one thing. Did he make it to the woman?" Emily's knees nearly gave out. She sank onto a dining chair with more force than grace, the wood scraping across the floor. "Who is this?" she asked, and hated how scared she sounded. Silence. Then, so he did. A car passed outside, tires humming over asphalt, and Emily's skin prickled so hard her arms hurt. "Who is this?" she repeated, louder. The voice seemed to shift further away from the receiver, as if the caller had turned his head. She heard another voice in the background, muffled, angry, impossible to make out. Then the caller came back. "If you're Emily Miller, you need to leave your house right now." Her breath caught. Why? Because whatever Marcus found, he wasn't supposed to find it. And if he got to you, then they know that too. They who? But the line clicked dead. Emily sat there with the useless phone against her ear, listening to nothing. The refrigerator was still running. Somehow that seemed insulting. The low domestic hum of it. The normalcy. She stood too quickly, her chair legs snapping against the tile, and began moving without a plan, driven by pure animal urgency. She went first to the hallway closet and yanked down the overnight duffel bag they used for weekend soccer tournaments. Her motions were jerky, clumsy. Sweat dampened the back of her neck, though the house was cold. She threw in jeans, sweaters, underwear, Sophie's inhaler, chargers, toiletries, then she froze with the zipper halfway open. Sophie. At Jenny Carpenter's house. Sleepover for a 5th-grade birthday, arranged days ago. The kind of ordinary thing Emily had almost canceled because Ben was missing, and nothing in life felt ordinary, but Sophie had begged, and Emily had given in because the child needed one normal night. A wave of relief hit so fast it made her dizzy. Sophie wasn't here. Sophie had not been 20 feet from a car smashing into the kitchen. Sophie was safe, for now. Emily gripped the bag and forced herself to think. She needed Sophie. She needed to get her before anyone else did. The thought was irrational on its face, and yet it landed in her body like certainty. She hurried upstairs. The second floor smelled faintly of laundry detergent and dust, familiar enough to hurt. In the master bedroom, she went straight to Ben's dresser, then stopped with her hand on the top drawer. For days, she had avoided rummaging through his things in any serious way because it felt like betrayal, because part of her feared what she might confirm. But that old marriage reflex, protect his privacy, protect the image, wait until you have proof, suddenly seemed pathetic. Privacy was for people who were present. She pulled the drawer open. Socks, t-shirts, nothing. Next drawer. Belts, receipts, a tie he never wore. She moved faster, opening, tossing, kneeling to look under the bed. Her breathing came hard now, shallow and rapid. At the back of the closet, behind a plastic dry cleaning bag, she found the lockbox. Small, steel, matte gray. She had never seen it before. Jesus, Ben, she whispered, anger briefly hotter than fear. She hauled it onto the bed and tried the obvious combinations first. Sophie's birthday, their anniversary, his own birthday. Nothing. She stood there staring at it while rain began outside. Soft at first, tapping against the bedroom window like fingertips. Then the image came to her with sudden clarity. Ben in the kitchen 3 weeks ago, typing numbers into the home security keypad while talking on the phone. His body turned away from her, shoulders tense. 0419. April noas prezece. The date his father died. She entered it. The box clicked open. Her hands actually recoiled before she forced them forward again. Inside lay a stack of cash bound with a bank strap, a USB drive, and a manila envelope thick enough to suggest paperwork or photographs. Emily sat slowly on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under her weight. She opened the envelope first. Mortgage statements, not theirs. Property tax bills for a house in Oak Brook. A corporate registration with Ben's signature on it. A deed transfer. And then photographs, glossy and close enough to feel invasive. Ben stepping out of a black sedan beside a woman Emily didn't know. In her late 30s maybe. Dark hair, expensive coat, one hand resting with practiced familiarity on his forearm. In one photo they were outside what looked like a rehab facility. In another they were standing beside a teenage boy in a wheelchair. His face gaunt but alert, sunlight glaring off the metal spokes. Emily studied the boy's features and felt something strange tug at her, some resemblance not obvious but insistent. The jawline, the eyes. Her stomach dropped. No, she said, but it wasn't denial anymore. It was recognition arriving too late. She looked back at the paperwork with a different lens. Payments, medical billing, home care invoices, the sort of expenses that could swallow a family whole, hidden expenses, maintained for years. Her fingertips went numb. Ben had another family, or half of one, or some variation of responsibility so deep and old that it had grown roots beneath their marriage. The revelation did not come with a clean stab of heartbreak the way movies lied it would. It came messy, layered. Humiliation first, then confusion. Then a fierce, humiliating compassion for the boy in the wheelchair. Because whatever Ben had done, whatever lie he had built, there had been a sick child inside it. She sat there too long, staring at the photographs until the edges blurred. Then the sound came from downstairs. Not loud, just a small, distinct shift. The front door opening with caution. Emily went rigid. Rain tapped harder at the glass. She heard a footstep in the foyer. Another, slow, deliberate. She killed the bedroom lamp with a slap of her hand, and the room plunged into shadow, except for the blue wash of stormlight through the curtains. Her own breath sounded monstrous. She gathered the envelope, the cash, the drive, shoved them into the duffel, then looked around wildly for something she could use as a weapon. Her fingers closed around the heavy ceramic lamp base she had just unplugged. Downstairs, a man's voice called softly. Emily? Officer Reynolds, maybe. Or someone who knew his name. The tone was wrong for police, though. Too intimate. Too careful. Emily, it's okay. I just want to talk. Her mouth tightened. She moved to the bedroom doorway and crouched low enough to see through the banister slats to the entry below. A man stood just inside the house, tall, broad-shouldered, rain darkening the shoulders of his camel coat. He looked up slightly, listening. She could see only half his face from this angle, but not enough to know him. He shut the front door behind him without turning on any lights. That detail decided it. Emily backed silently into Sophie's room. crossed to the window, and fought with the sash until it groaned upward an inch at a time. Cold, wet air rushed in, carrying the smell of mud and leaves and distant chimney smoke. She swung one leg over, then stopped when the man downstairs called again, voice lower now, stripped of pretense. "Marcus is in surgery. You really think he crashed by accident?" Emily squeezed her eyes shut, fury flashing through the terror. He knew exactly what words would pin her in place. She hated him for being right. She climbed back inside, but did not answer. Instead, she slipped into the hall and descended 2 stairs, keeping to the edge where old wood squeaked less. The man was now in the living room, profile visible in the weak street glow leaking through the windows. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, good haircut, the kind of face that looked expensive because other people were paid to maintain it. He had no umbrella, no police radio, no visible badge. He turned slightly, scanning the room with controlled impatience. Emily tightened her grip on the lamp base until the cord cut into her palm. "Who are you?" she said. He looked up immediately. No surprise in his expression. He had known she was there. "My name is Daniel Corbett," he said. "I'm here because your husband made a very serious mistake, and Marcus Hale got close enough to understand it. Get out of my house. I will. The second we make sure you don't turn this into something worse." He spoke like an attorney, smoothing out an inconvenience, not a man breaking into a damaged home during a storm. Emily came down one more step. "You broke in. Your front door doesn't latch. That's not consent." Something like tired amusement flickered across his face. "You sound like a person who still thinks process will save her." That landed because she had spent the last 11 days telling herself exactly that. Cooperate with police. Tell the truth. Stay calm. The system works. Yet here stood a stranger in her house, making her feel like the child in the room. "What did Ben do?" she asked. Corbett's gaze shifted to the duffel bag on her shoulder, to the envelope edge barely visible from the zipper. He saw too much too fast. "Ah," he said quietly. "So now we have a second problem." He took one step forward. Emily raised the lamp base. "Don't." He stopped. Rain beat harder against the broken kitchen opening, wind pushing mist across the tile. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, long and low. Corbett looked not angry, but disappointed, as if the evening were becoming more tedious than expected. Your husband was helping move money through a real estate shell. He told himself it was temporary, necessary. Medical debt makes cowards out of proud men. Maybe he thought he could step away before understanding who he was working for. Maybe he even tried. I'm not unsympathetic. Emily's throat felt raw. Where is he? Corbett tilted his head, studying her. You really don't know. Where is my husband? He ignored the question. What matters now is that Marcus got hold of a thread he should have left alone. If he spoke to you, if he gave you anything, then several very nervous people will assume you can damage them. I'm here to prevent overreaction. By threatening me? By offering you a smaller harm than the one that comes next. Emily, let that sit in the air. Heard how practiced it was. How many times he had likely used gentle words to describe brutal choices. Her eyes flicked to the front door, measuring distance. Corbett noticed. You won't make it to the car before my driver sees you, he said. And before you ask, yes, he's armed. No, I'm not proud of that either. A nauseating calm settled over her. Not peace, but a narrowing. She thought of Sophie asleep under mermaid blankets at Jenny Carpenter's house. She thought of Marcus bleeding onto an airbag. She thought of Ben signing papers in secret, carrying debts and loyalties she had never been allowed to touch. Then she thought of the phone call. Leave your house right now. Not because the house itself was unsafe, but because staying still had become impossible. What smaller harm? She asked. Corbett spread his hands an inch from his sides. You come with me. We talk somewhere quiet. You hand over whatever Marcus passed to you, plus whatever you just found. Your daughter remains untouched. You get to keep being disappointed in your husband from a comfortable distance. Emily stared at him until her vision sharpened unnaturally. Every detail, bright and cruel, the raindrops on his coat collar, the vein pulsing once at his temple, the bit of plaster dust on the toe of his Italian shoe. You said my daughter, she said softly. So you know where she is. Corbett did not answer. He didn't need to. Something inside her, something exhausted and frightened and civilized, cracked cleanly down the middle. When she moved, she didn't think. She hurled the lamp base not at his head, which he might have dodged, but at the standing mirror beside him. It exploded with a deafening crash of ceramic and glass. Corbett flinched hard on instinct, one arm shielding his face. Emily ran. She launched herself down the remaining stairs, cut through the kitchen, and dove through the jagged opening in the wall into the wet darkness of her backyard, landing badly on one knee in mud so cold it stabbed up her thigh. Behind her, Corbett shouted, the first honest sound she'd heard from him all night, stripped of polish and edged with rage. A beam of light snapped on near the side yard. Someone else was moving. Emily scrambled up, clutching the duffel to her chest, and ran toward the alley behind the neighboring yards as rain hammered the fences and the entire world dissolved into shadow, breath, pain, and the savage certainty that whatever truth she was carrying now, it was big enough to get people killed and too late to put back where it had been hidden. She hit the back gate with both hands and the swollen wood refused to give, rainwater having bloated it into the frame. And for one wild second, the stupid, mundane resistance of it felt more terrifying than the man in her house because it was so ordinary, so absurdly suburban. A gate that always stuck in bad weather. A thing Ben had promised to shave down last fall and never did. And now that unfinished chore might be the reason she got caught. Emily dropped the duffel into the mud, set one foot against the fence post, and yanked so hard, the latch ripped loose with a metallic snap that jarred through her shoulder. She squeezed through the gap sideways, the wet wood scraping her coat and catching strands of her hair, then stumbled into the alley behind the row of houses, where trash bins leaned under the yellow wash of motion lights, and the rain turned the packed gravel into black sludge. She kept running. Her breath tore in and out of her chest in ragged bursts, hot against the cold air, while the duffel thudded against her hip and the envelope corners inside it jabbed her ribs. Somewhere behind her a man shouted. Not Daniel Corbett this time, but another voice, deeper, closer to the alley mouth. A flashlight beam cut across the rain like a blade. Emily veered left, shoes slipping, one hand out to steady herself against garage siding slick with runoff. The alley smelled like wet cardboard, gasoline, rotting leaves, and the sour, trapped odor from dumpsters left too long in summer and never fully redeemed by winter. Her knee screamed every time her right foot hit the ground, but the pain sharpened her instead of slowing her. She passed the rear of the Costellos' yard, then the Larsons, then the vacant rental with the busted porch swing. And with each house, the neighborhood shifted from hers into something slightly less known, the invisible border between comfort and exposure. A security light snapped on above a detached garage, bleaching everything white for a second. Emily ducked instinctively and cut between two parked cars. She could hear footsteps now, not right behind her but not far enough. One man, maybe two. She forced herself not to look back. Looking back made people stumble. Looking back made fear choose your direction for you. She needed a plan, not just movement. Jenny Carpenter's house was 6 blocks east, too exposed if Corbett already knew Sophie was there, and he clearly did. The police station was less than 10 minutes by car, but impossible on foot if she kept losing ground in back alleys. Her own car sat in the driveway at home, probably watched. Her phone was in her purse. Her purse, thank God, was still in the duffel. Marcus's phone was there too, a hot little brick of trouble. She slid behind a neighbor's detached garage, dropped into a crouch beside a line of recycling bins, and sucked air through clenched teeth while rain drummed on the metal lids. Her hands shook so violently she nearly fumbled the zipper. She yanked out her phone, saw 3 missed calls from her sister Claire. One text from Jenny, "Everything okay? Saw lights outside your place?" And another from an unknown number with no preview. Emily's thumb hovered. Call 911. Obviously, except obviously had not been working tonight. Call Reynolds, specifically. But she did not have his direct line. Call Claire and tell her to get Sophie? Claire lived 40 minutes away in Naperville, and panic was not a strategy. She opened the unknown text. Get to seat Agnes ER. Ask for Nadia. Come alone. The message had no signature, no punctuation beyond that, no softness, no explanation. Street. Agnes was where the ambulance would have taken Marcus. Emily read it twice, rain dripping from her hair onto the screen. Nadia. The name meant nothing. The timing meant everything. Her heart kicked harder. Either this was the help Marcus had been trying to point her toward, or it was a funnel designed by the same people chasing her. She hated that there was no stable ground left from which to judge anything. Her whole adult life had been built around evaluation, around making choices that looked safe, reasonable, respectable, marry the kind man with the accounting job, buy the practical house in the good school district, join the PTA, refinance at the right time, endure what can be endured, because stability is what decent people do for children. And now, stability felt like a costume someone had stripped off her body in public. She thought of Sophie's face if strangers ever reached that sleepover. She thought of Corbett saying, "Your daughter remains untouched," in the polished tone of a man discussing warranty coverage. The thought made bile rise in her throat. She opened Jenny's text and typed with numb, clumsy thumbs. Small emergency. Please do not let anyone pick up Sophie except me. No one. Lock doors. I'm calling soon. She hit send, then immediately turned off read receipts, as if tiny control still mattered. Another flashlight beam skimmed the alley entrance. Emily shoved the phone away, grabbed the duffel, and moved again, this time staying low, cutting through a side gate into the narrow passage between duplexes that opened onto Waverly Avenue. The street was nearly empty in the rain. A city bus hissed past at the intersection, interior lights glowing gold against fogged windows, almost dreamlike in its indifference. Emily ran for it even though she knew she wouldn't catch it, propelled by pure reflex toward anything moving, anything public. The bus rolled through the green light and disappeared, leaving only spray. At the curb sat an idling rideshare sedan with its hazard lights blinking. The driver, a heavy-set woman in her 50s, with reading glasses low on her nose, was checking her phone. Emily was already reaching for the passenger handle before she decided to. "Please," she said through the cracked window, breathless and soaked. "I need a ride. I know this looks crazy." The woman looked up, took in Emily's mud-splattered coat, wild hair, bleeding knee, and the fact that she was alone in the rain at nearly 11 at night. Suspicion warred visibly with compassion. "You okay, honey?" she asked. Emily nearly laughed at the inadequacy of the question. "No, but I will be if you drive." The woman's eyes flicked over Emily's shoulder toward the alley. "Are you in trouble?" "Yes." The answer landed between them with enough honesty to change the air. The driver hit the unlock button. "Get in." Emily slid into the back seat and slammed the door just as a man in dark clothes emerged from the mouth of the alley and stopped, scanning the street. She ducked down instinctively. "Drive," she said. "Anywhere, just go." The woman put the car into gear with a decisiveness Emily would remember later. Seatbelt. Emily snapped it on with wet fingers. The sedan pulled away from the curb. She kept her head down until they turned twice, and the alley was gone. Until the man was nothing more than a possibility left behind in rain. Only then did she sit back and realize she was shaking so hard the seat trembled under her. The car smelled of peppermint gum, old coffee, and one of those vanilla tree air fresheners clipped to the vent. Country music played softly from the front speakers, some song about a truck, and a memory, and a girl who left, and the everydayness of it made Emily's eyes sting. "You want me to call the cops?" the driver asked. "I can pull into a gas station." Emily stared at her own reflection in the side window, faint over the wet blur of storefronts and traffic lights. She looked like a woman people would cross the street to avoid. "Not yet," she said. "Can you take me to Street Agnes Hospital?" The driver met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "That kind of trouble?" "That kind." The woman nodded slowly. "Name's Denise. My son's a paramedic there. You start bleeding out. I got some paper towels and exactly one stale granola bar." The attempt at humor landed softly but perfectly, and Emily let out a cracked breath that might have been the beginning of a sob if she had allowed it room. "Emily," she said. "Thank you." Denise shrugged one shoulder. "World's ugly enough. Doesn't cost me much not to add to it." The words lodged in Emily's chest because they were so simple, so opposite of everything else tonight. She turned her face toward the window and watched Chicago slide by in wet fragments, closed laundromats, a liquor store glowing green and red, a gas station with one man filling a pickup under buzzing fluorescents, apartments stacked over barbershops and tax offices. Rain gathered in the seams of the city and reflected it back in distorted bands of neon. As the car moved east, the neighborhoods shifted, houses giving way to denser blocks, then institutional brick, chain pharmacies, a church with floodlit stone saints streaked black by time. Emily pulled Marcus's phone from the duffel and checked it again. Battery 3%. She opened recent calls. D. 2 outgoing to a number with no contact. 1 incoming from private. A voicemail icon blinked. Her pulse quickened. She tapped it just as the battery warning flashed. Marcus's voice came through thin and rough, recorded over road noise. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, I'm not using the line again. Corbett's dirty. Not maybe. Dirty. Financial crimes buried the shell transfers 6 months ago, and somebody in CPD helped kill the subpoena. I'm sending the drive to static," swallowed several words. Then, "If I don't make it, keep Miller alive. She doesn't know what she has." The message ended. The phone died. Emily sat frozen, the dead device in her hand. "Keep Miller alive. She doesn't know what she has." That tiny sentence rearranged something in her. For days, she had felt like a side character in her own life, a wife under suspicion, a nervous civilian waiting for official men to interpret events on her behalf. But Marcus had not been protecting evidence. He had been protecting her because she herself had become evidence, carrier, witness, leverage, maybe all at once. The duffel on her lap suddenly felt heavier than its size justified. Denise glanced back. "Hospital's 5 minutes." Emily nodded and put the dead phone away. Then her own phone rang. Jenny. Emily answered immediately. Jenny? She was trying to sound calm, but the word came out ragged. Emily, what is going on? Jenny whispered, and in the background Emily could hear the cartoonishly loud soundtrack of children's sleepover television turned down low. Sophie's fine. She's asleep. But a man came by 10 minutes ago. Emily's entire body locked. What man? Suit, umbrella, said he was with the police and needed to ask Sophie some questions because of the accident. Emily stopped breathing for a second. Denise glanced back again, reading the panic from her face without context. You didn't let him in? Emily asked. Hell no, Emily. I'm not stupid. But he had your address, your husband's name. He had a card. Jenny, listen to me very carefully. Do not open the door for anyone. Not police, not anyone, unless they are uniformed and you call 911 and verify them yourself. Wake Sophie up. Put shoes on her. Keep her away from windows. Oh my God. Should I bring her somewhere? Emily closed her eyes. The responsible answer was yes. The practical answer was nowhere felt safe enough to name. No. Stay where you are for now. I'll come get her as soon as I can. Jenny was quiet for one beat too long. Emily, is Ben in some kind of trouble? Emily looked out at the hospital, coming into view ahead. Street. Agnes, rising from the rain in slabs of concrete and glass, the emergency sign red against the black sky. I think Ben may have been in trouble for a long time, she said. It was the closest thing to truth she could manage. Just keep my daughter with you. I will. Jenny's voice softened. Hurry. The call ended. Denise pulled under the ER awning, wipers still beating furiously. Orderlies in blue scrubs moved in and out through sliding doors, shoes squeaking on wet concrete, while an ambulance backed into a bay with a mechanical beep that seemed indecently cheerful. You want me to wait? Denise asked. Emily almost said yes, almost paid any amount just to preserve one witness, one benevolent stranger, one little pocket of humanity nearby. But waiting would endanger Denise too, and Emily had already become toxic to the people around her. No, she said. Then, because it mattered, thank you for not asking me for proof. Denise snorted. Honey, you think I haven't seen panic before? She reached back and pressed a small canister into Emily's hand. Pepper spray. Pink keychain attached. My daughter says I'm dramatic. Tonight I'm maternal. Take it. Emily stared at it. Then at Denise. I can't. You can. Go. Emily closed her fingers around the canister, opened the door, and stepped into the bright, wet night under the awning. Rain blew sideways at the edge of the overhang, cold enough to sting. Ambulance exhaust mixed with antiseptic air leaking from the sliding doors. The hospital had that peculiar late-night energy she knew from Sophie's asthma attacks and Ben's father's final weeks. A blend of exhaustion and emergency. Vending machine, sugar and bleach, whispered prayers and clipped instructions. Inside, fluorescent light flattened everyone to the same pale vulnerability. Families sat hunched over paper coffee cups. A toddler cried hoarsely in triage. A janitor mopped around muddy footprints without looking up. Emily adjusted the duffel on her shoulder and moved to the desk. Every nerve alert for Corbett, for a driver, for anyone watching too closely. The triage nurse, a woman with silver braids and reading glasses on a chain, looked up. Can I help you? Emily swallowed. I need to see Nadia. The nurse's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. She typed once, then twice, and picked up the phone beside her without breaking eye contact. Can you spell your last name? Miller. The nurse listened to a response only she could hear, then set the receiver down. Take the elevator to 4. Turn right. End of the hall. Family consult, room B. Emily nodded, too surprised by the lack of questions to thank her immediately. The nurse added, quieter. If anyone asks, you're here for a relative in surgery. Emily understood enough to say, thank you, and move. The elevator ride felt longer than physics allowed. She stood alone beneath the humming panel lights, water dripping from her coat onto the rubber floor, clutching pepper spray in one hand, inside her pocket and the duffel strap in the other. Her mind tried to race ahead. Who is Nadia? Is Marcus alive? Is this Daniel from the voicemail? Is this the last smart thing or the next dumb one? But her body overruled thought, with simpler demands. Breathe. Listen. Stay upright. When the doors opened on 4, the hallway beyond was quieter, carpeted, dimmer, lined with framed photographs of gardens meant to soothe people who were past soothing. At the far end, family consult room B stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the crack. Emily approached slowly, feeling each beat of her heart in her throat, in her wrists, in the bruise blooming across her knee. Just before she reached the door, she heard voices inside. A woman, low and controlled. A man, strained, younger than she expected. Then the woman said, "She's here." before Emily had even touched the handle, and the certainty in her voice made it clear they had seen her coming. Had been waiting, had arranged this with more competence than anyone else had shown tonight. Emily pushed the door open and stepped into the room, already knowing with a cold, irreversible certainty that whatever remained of her old life would not survive what she heard next. The woman standing by the window was in her early 50s, black, composed in a navy blazer over surgical scrubs, with the kind of stillness that made everyone else in the room seem unprepared by comparison. And the young man beside the coffee machine looked like he had not slept in 2 days, dark stubble shadowing his jaw, tie loosened, one shirt cuff stained with what might have been blood or old coffee, his posture taut enough to suggest he was holding himself together by muscle memory alone. Neither of them smiled. The woman gave a slight nod toward the chair opposite the couch. "Close the door, Mrs. Miller." Emily did not move right away. The room was too warm after the hallway, carrying the stale smell of burned coffee, copier toner, and the faint medicinal odor that lived in every hospital wall. A box of tissues sat on the table like an accusation. The blinds were half open over black glass, reflecting all three of them back into the room in pale layers. Emily's hand remained on the door handle as she studied the exits, the vents, the phone mounted on the wall, the absence of anything she could classify as safety. "Are you Nadia?" she asked. "Dr. Nadia Brooks," the woman said. "Hospital administration officially, unofficially, someone Marcus trusted." She tilted her head toward the young man. "This is Daniel Reyes, Assistant U.S. Attorney." Emily's eyes snapped to him. "Daniel." The voicemail. The young man nodded once, tired and wary. "Not Corbett. That's not funny. Wasn't trying to be." Emily closed the door but stayed standing. Her soaked coat had begun to chill against her skin, and the room's heat only seemed to drive the damp deeper. "Is Marcus alive?" she asked. Reyes and Brooks shared a glance that was too quick to be comforting. Brooks answered, "He survived surgery. He's not conscious. The next 12 hours matter." Emily absorbed that with no relief attached to it, only a temporary reduction in dread. "Then talk," she said. "Because men keep showing up in my house and at my daughter's sleepover, and I'm done being the last person told what my life is." Reyes scrubbed a hand over his face, then stepped forward and pulled a slim folder from the table. "Your husband, Benjamin Miller, was working with a network that launders money through real estate acquisitions, medical debt restructuring, and shell nonprofits. That part we can prove. What we were trying to prove next was the leverage model." Emily frowned, anger and exhaustion colliding so hard she almost laughed. "Leverage model? Say it in English." He met her gaze. "They find people under financial pressure. Sick kids, bankrupt parents, aging relatives, people who need cash fast and need it to look clean. Then they offer help. A bridge loan, a consulting contract, a property deal. Once the money lands, the target is compromised. After that, the work escalates." Emily felt the room narrow around her. "And Ben?" Reyes hesitated just long enough to make honesty visible. He wasn't a mastermind. He was an accountant who knew how to move numbers without triggering automated flags. At first he was useful because he was cautious. Later he became dangerous for the same reason. Emily set the duffel down by her chair but did not sit. Her fingers were beginning to ache as sensation returned from the cold. Dangerous to who? To Corbett's people. To anyone who thought he might talk. Dr. Brooks folded her arms. Marcus believed Ben was trying to come in. Emily stared at her. "Come in where?" "Federal cooperation," Reyes said. "Off the books at first. He reached out through an intermediary 2 weeks ago. Then he missed the follow-up and disappeared." Emily's laugh came out wrong, brittle, and disbelieving. "He disappeared from me before that." The words hung there, more intimate than she intended. For the first time, Reyes's expression shifted from prosecutorial to human. "We know." Emily wanted to ask how. She did not have the strength to care. Instead, she crouched, unzipped the duffel, and took out the manila envelope, the USB drive, and the stack of cash. Placing them one by one on the table between them, the sound of each item landing seemed unnaturally loud. Brooks's eyes lowered to the drive and stayed there. "Where did you get this?" "Ben's lockbox." Emily touched the envelope. "There are deeds, bills, photos. Another woman. A teenage boy in a wheelchair." Reyes went very still. "You saw the boy. Who is he?" Reyes did not answer immediately. He looked at Brooks, then back to Emily, as if measuring the damage of one more truth against the damage already done. "His name is Luke Donnelly," he said. "He's 17. Muscular dystrophy. Ben is his biological father." Emily had prepared herself, at least in outline, for that possibility when she saw the photographs. The confirmation still landed like a physical blow. Not because it was surprising anymore, but because surprise had been replaced by detail, and detail was crueler. Luke, 17. A body, a history, birthday cakes and doctor visits and first words and school forms signed by someone. A life her husband had inhabited in parallel to theirs, not as fantasy or affair but as ongoing fact. Emily sat down because her knees made the decision for her. The chair creaked softly. She kept her eyes on the table so they would not see the exact moment her marriage broke open into something she could never reconstruct. How long? She asked. Reyes answered too quietly. Almost 18 years. Emily nodded once. A hard, tiny motion. Her mind reacted in fragments rather than sentences. Before Sophie was born. During the apartment in Lincoln Square. During the vows. During every Christmas card and tax return and anniversary dinner, where Ben had toasted partnership with his earnest, careful eyes. She felt humiliation first, then something stranger and more exhausting than rage. The violent rearrangement of memory. Moments she had filed away as stress or distance or work pressure now came back lit from behind by another house, another child, another set of responsibilities he had chosen to hide rather than name. The mother? Emily asked. Renee Donnelly, Brooks said. She and Ben had a relationship before he met you. She didn't tell him about the pregnancy until Luke was already sick. He got involved financially. Then, emotionally, in whatever limited and guilty way men like him prefer. Emily looked up sharply. Brooks did not flinch. I'm not protecting his reputation, Brooks said. You don't need me to. That almost made Emily like her, which felt offensive given the circumstances. She rubbed her palms against her jeans and realized they were leaving faint streaks of mud on the denim. So Ben hides another son for 18 years and launders money for criminals to pay medical bills, she said. That's the story? Not the whole one, Reyes said. Corbett isn't just a financial operator. He's counsel to a development group that's been buying distressed hospitals, elder care facilities, and debt portfolios. The money laundering sits inside legitimate acquisitions, but the real value is the private patient data and insurance vulnerabilities that come with those purchases. People with catastrophic illnesses are profitable from every angle if you're corrupt enough. Emily stared at him. You're saying sick people are inventory. I'm saying that's how they think. Doctor, Brooks crossed to the table and slid a paper toward Emily, not close enough to force it on her, just within reach, if she wanted it. It was a printout of corporate entities and arrows and names, the sort of chart that reduced lives to structure. One node carried the name Corbett Legal Advisory. Another, Oak Meridian Development. Another, Street Agnes Transitional Holdings. Emily's stomach tightened. She looked at Brooks. This hospital? Brooks nodded once. Partially acquired 8 months ago. I stayed because leaving would have left the oncology families alone with them. Emily looked back at the chart. And Marcus found this? Marcus found enough to get himself nearly killed, Reyes said. He was using local warrants to pressure a broader conspiracy because formal channels kept leaking. Dirty cops, Emily said. Some. Enough. Emily leaned back in the chair and shut her eyes for 1 second, maybe 2. Behind her lids, she could still see Corbett in her ruined living room, calm as a priest, talking about smaller harms. When she opened her eyes again, the room looked unchanged and entirely different. My daughter is not safe, she said. Not a question. Brooks answered first. No. The honesty of it brought a strange kind of steadiness. Emily swallowed. Then why am I here instead of in a federal building? Reyes's jaw tightened. Because the minute we move visibly, Corbett's network starts burning records and relocating people, including Renee and Luke. We've been trying to build a case big enough to survive those losses. Marcus thought if he could get the drive before Ben disappeared, we'd have enough. Emily's gaze dropped to the USB drive. Such a small thing. Plastic and metal. Cheap, anonymous, able to alter lives by existing. Do we? She asked. Reyes did not sugarcoat it. Maybe. Depends what's on it. Brooks moved to the wall phone and lifted the receiver, asking someone for an air-gapped laptop in a tone that made clear she was accustomed to being obeyed even inside structures that did not officially belong to her. Emily watched her, thinking how odd it was to sit in a family consult room waiting to autopsy your husband's secrets, while children cried somewhere down the hall and a soda machine buzzed outside the door. She thought of Sophie in borrowed pajamas, maybe awake now, maybe whispering questions to Jenny that Jenny could not answer. She wanted her daughter with an ache so primal it almost erased thought. Yet beneath that longing, something harder kept forming. Corbett had already crossed the line from abstract danger to named threat. He had stood in her house and attached Sophie to his bargaining language. Whatever hesitation Emily had once possessed about exposing Ben's lies, protecting appearances, managing fallout, it had been burned out of her in the rain. The door opened, and a young resident in green scrubs entered, carrying a laptop, eyes down, either uninformed or smart enough not to show curiosity. Brooks took it, thanked her, locked the door after she left, and set the machine on the table. Reyes used a gloved hand from a plastic evidence kit to pick up the drive. If this is encrypted, we may need. He stopped, as the screen populated almost instantly with folders. No password. Jesus, he muttered. Emily watched his face change as he clicked through file names. Ledger, Q3. AC. Patient transfer. Ren. Trust. Hail notes. Then another folder. Donnelly. Reyes clicked that and swore softly. Brooks came closer. Emily remained seated but leaned forward, unable not to. Inside were PDFs of medical invoices, scanned insurance appeals, school transportation forms, physical therapy schedules, and a video file labeled Luke 11:14. Emily knew before anyone spoke that this was what had held Ben inside the machine. Not greed in the cartoon sense. Not at first. Need, shame, obligation metastasized into complicity. Brooks touched the back of a chair but did not sit. Open the ledgers, she said. Reyes did. Columns filled the screen. Property addresses, shell entities, transfer routes, amounts large enough to feel numbingly unreal. One highlighted line referenced Street Agnes Oncology Debt Conversion Program. Another referenced judicial outreach expenditures under initials D. C. Emily saw Reyes' screenshot, copy, flag. His movements became more efficient as adrenaline replaced fatigue. This is enough for emergency warrants, he said. If chain holds, Brooks asked. If chain leaks? He looked at her. Then people die earlier instead of later. The bluntness of it made the room go very quiet. Emily stared at the line items until the numbers blurred into shape without meaning. Then her attention snagged on the folder labeled Hail Notes. Open that, Reyes did. Inside sat audio memos and typed notes. One document, timestamped 6 hours earlier, opened to a page of rapid bullet points. Marcus's writing was clean, even in haste. Ben ready to flip. Primary motive. Donnelly medical leverage plus daughter protection. Corbett, using Mrs. Miller as pressure vector. Unsure how much she knows. If contact lost, assume house not safe. Don't trust Reynolds. Emily felt ice move through her limbs. Reynolds, she said. The officer with the notepad. The sympathetic face. The one who had told her to find somewhere else to stay. Reyes looked up sharply. The patrol officer at your house? Tall, stern, notepad. Said his name was Reynolds. Brooks exhaled through her nose. Then they were ahead of Marcus before the crash. Emily's mind jumped backward, reordering details again. The questions, the measured tone, the feeling of being watched in the crowd, the ease with which everyone had accepted the scene. Was the crash staged? She asked. Reyes shook his head once. Probably an attempted stop that went wrong. If Corbett wanted Marcus dead cleanly, he'd prefer somewhere less visible. The warning to you suggests Marcus retained control long enough to improvise. Emily looked at the words on the screen. Daughter protection. Pressure vector. She hated how quickly she had become fluent in the cold language men used to discuss families when families were leverage. She hated even more that Ben had apparently understood it before she did. Where is Ben now? She asked again. This time Brooks answered with care. We think Corbett moved him to a private recovery property after he tried to back out. Not necessarily dead. Not necessarily alive in any way you'd find merciful. Emily pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until sparks flickered. Some part of her still wanted him alive, if only so she could ask one impossible question with sufficient force. How could you love us and still do this? But that sentence itself had split in two. Us no longer meant one thing. There was Sophie. There was Luke. There was Renee. There had always been more than one family living beneath the roof of Ben's silence. Emily lowered her hands and found Brooks watching her with an expression that was not pity exactly, but something stern and neighboring it. You don't have to collapse right now, Brooks said. That can happen later. Emily let out a sound that might have been a laugh in healthier weather. How generous. Reyes closed the folder and straightened. We have maybe an hour before any move we make becomes visible. Less if Corbett already knows you reached us. Emily thought of the driver in the alley, the fake officer at Jenny's door, the speed with which Corbett's people moved. He knows. Reyes nodded. Then here are the choices. 1. We pull you and your daughter into protective custody immediately and start serving whatever warrants we can before the leaks outrun us. 2. We use the fact that Corbett thinks you're still scared and disorganized. We let him make one more move and intercept. Emily stared at him. Use me as bait. Brooks cut in before Reyes could answer. Use his assumptions, not your body. Emily held his gaze anyway. But close enough. Reyes did not insult her with denial. Close enough. She looked from him to the chart, to the dead tissue box, to the drive on the table that had ripped open a life she no longer recognized. Her thoughts turned, inevitably, to Sophie. Protective custody meant squad cars, questions, school gone, headlines maybe, the end of whatever innocence still survived. Bait meant risk, immediate and personal, and potentially fatal. Neither path protected the old world because the old world had already failed. Saving one thing would fracture another. She understood that now with a clarity so complete it almost felt calm. If I do this, she said slowly, my daughter gets moved before anyone touches a door, not after, not as part of a process. Before, Brooks answered. Agreed, Reyes nodded. Agreed. Emily stood, legs unsteady but functional, and put one hand flat on the table beside the drive, grounding herself in the chill plastic surface. Then stop talking to me like I'm adjacent, she said. Tell me exactly what kind of woman you need me to be. Reyes held her gaze for a long second, as if checking whether the question would survive its own courage. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded photograph. Not glossy, just laser printed on office paper, bent at one corner, and slid it across the table toward her with 2 fingers. This woman, he said. Emily looked down. The photo showed Renee Donnelly stepping out of a silver minivan in front of a narrow brick bungalow, with a wheelchair ramp cut into the front steps and a blue recycling bin tipped on its side by wind. She wore scrubs under a fleece jacket, hair tied back, face drawn with the sort of fatigue Emily recognized intimately from her own mirror during Sophie's worst asthma seasons. Luke sat in the passenger seat of the van, head turned toward her, mouth open mid-sentence, one hand thin and pale against the armrest. The picture was almost aggressively ordinary. That was what made it hurt. There was no glamour to it, no cinematic evidence of betrayal, just errands and illness and the daily logistical grind of keeping someone alive. Corbett's people moved on Renee twice in the last 6 months, Reyes said. Not directly violent. Regulatory harassment. Mortgage pressure. A fake complaint that nearly cost her nursing license. Enough to remind Ben who controlled the lane his money moved through. Emily kept staring at Renee's face, trying not to imagine Ben in that driveway. Ben carrying groceries into that house. Ben learning how to fold a wheelchair into a trunk while she, Emily, had been at home reminding Sophie to brush the backs of her teeth. Her first instinct was savage and embarrassing and human. I want to hate her. But the thought disintegrated almost on contact with the image in front of her. Hate required simplicity. There was none left. So you need me to what? Emily said quietly, setting the picture down. Pretend I'll trade the drive? Reyes nodded once. Corbett already tried to retrieve you by persuasion. If you reach back out, scared enough to bargain, he may believe he still has control. Especially if he thinks you haven't had time to understand the contents. Doctor, Brooks stepped closer to the table, palms resting on the edge, shoulders squared. You'd call from your phone, not a burner. People like Corbett trust fear when it sounds domestic. A woman protecting her child is more believable to him than a woman turning into an operative overnight. Emily almost smiled at the brutality of the truth. So, the woman you need is the one he already underestimated. Yes, Brooks said. Exactly that woman. Emily inhaled slowly through her nose. The air in the consult room had gone stale, overheated, full of old ventilation and coffee residue. It made her want cold, rain, motion, anything cleaner than strategic conversation. She glanced toward the door, thinking of Sophie again with a force so constant it had become background pain. You said before my daughter gets moved, she said. I want proof, not promises. Reyes pulled out his phone, typed quickly, then set it face up on the table when it rang. He put the call on speaker. A woman's voice answered, clipped and official. Task Force. It's Reyes. I need confirmation on juvenile pickup, Carpenter residence, Oak Park. Status now. Papers shuffled on the other end. Then, team is 2 minutes out. Female deputy, uniformed with marked county unit. Child transfer destination remains sealed medical ward as discussed. Emily stepped closer without realizing it. Breath caught high in her chest. Put them on when they get there, she said. Reyes relayed the request. The woman on the line said, understood, and hung up. The room went quiet except for the laptop fan and the muted beeping from somewhere down the hallway, the clinical metronome of a hospital night that refused to care about any one family's collapse. Emily leaned both hands on the back of the chair she had been sitting in and stared at the seat cushion, at an old coffee stain the shape of a state she couldn't name. Her mind kept attempting little rebellions against reality, small, irrational negotiations. Maybe Ben was forced. Maybe there's a version of this where he meant to tell you. Maybe secrecy was temporary until it calcified. Maybe love and cowardice had lived in him at the same time. But every maybe fell apart against the one fact she could not soften. He had let danger enter their home long before the SUV hit the wall. He had let men like Corbett learn Sophie's name. That was the sin that eclipsed the affair, the hidden son, the lies, all of it. Emily straightened. "When do I call?" she asked. Reyes checked his watch. "As soon as Sophie is physically in motion. If we're lucky, Corbett's still cleaning up the scene at your house and trying to find out where you landed. If we're unlucky, he already knows you reached us, and he'll try to accelerate." "Accelerate what?" Emily asked. "Containment," Brooks said. "Destroy records. Move witnesses. Move, Ben, if he's alive." Emily folded her arms tightly across herself and immediately forced them back down. She did not want to look defensive. Not even here. Not even accidentally. Her body had started interpreting every posture as evidence. And if he suspects a trap, then he may send someone below his own visibility, Reyes said. A courier. A fixer. Dirty law enforcement. Emily thought of Officer Reynolds, his pad, his sympathetic tone, the practiced way he had looked at a frightened woman and assessed how much effort she would require. She felt heat rise into her face, not from shame exactly, but from delayed fury at how easily she had been handled. "I want Reynolds too," she said. "Not someday. Not after paperwork." Reyes nodded. "If he steps into the operation, he's ours." Emily looked at him. "You sound like you're trying to reassure me." "I'm trying to be precise." "That's not the same." "No," he said. "It isn't." The wall phone rang, sudden and shrill. Brooks grabbed it on the first ring. "Yes." She listened, then held out the receiver to Emily. "They're at Jenny's." Emily crossed the room so fast her hip clipped the table. She took the phone with both hands. "Jenny? Emily?" Jenny sounded breathless and furious, the voice of a woman whose evening had been stolen, and who intended to stay functional anyway. "There's a deputy here, female, county badge, marked car outside, just like you said. Sophie's putting on shoes. She's crying, honey." Emily shut her eyes. Her throat tightened instantly. "Put her on." There was muffled movement, a child's confused protest, then Sophie's small voice, sticky with sleep and fear. "Mom?" The word nearly broke Emily where she stood. She turned her face toward the wall so Reyes and Brooks would not see too much. "Hey, baby. Listen to me. Okay? You're going on a little drive with a police lady. She's nice. She's going to take you to a safe place, and I'm meeting you there." "What happened?" Jenny said there was a crash. "There was a mess at the house, but I'm okay." She forced calm into every syllable. The kind mothers manufacture out of nothing because children borrow their reality. "I need you to be brave for me right now." Sophie sniffed hard. "Are you coming now?" Emily opened her eyes and stared at the blank beige wall, at the slight scuff mark where someone had once rolled a chair into it. "Soon," she said, which was both truthful and possibly cruel. "You stay with the deputy. You don't go with anybody else. Not for any reason. Say it back to me. I don't go with anybody else." "Good girl." Emily swallowed against the ache in her chest. "I love you. Love you too." The line clicked as the phone changed hands. The deputy came on, identifying herself and confirming the transfer route in terms too vague to be useful to anyone listening improperly. Then Brooks took the phone back and ended the call. Emily stood very still for one full breath, then another, her fingertips numb from gripping the receiver. Sophie was moving. That was not safety yet, but it was motion, and motion mattered. Reyes slid Emily's phone across the table. Time. She looked at the screen as if it belonged to someone else. Corbett's number had been copied over from Marcus's recent calls. D. One letter, one open door. Emily sat again because the act of calling required a surface beneath her, required some illusion of support. Reyes positioned the laptop so she could not see the tactical messages coming in on the side. Brooks remained near the window, not looming, just present, like a surgeon scrubbed in and waiting for consent. Emily unlocked her phone and pressed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th, Corbett answered. "Mrs. Miller," he said, and his voice was so smooth it made her skin crawl. "I was beginning to think the rain had improved your judgment." Emily closed her eyes for half a second and pictured Sophie tying her own sneakers with fumbling, sleepy hands. When she spoke, she let that image make her voice shake. "You said we could make a deal." A pause. "I did. I found something," she said. "I don't understand most of it. I don't want to. I just want my daughter left alone." Corbett exhaled, a soft sound almost like satisfaction. "That sounds more like the woman I met." Emily dug her nails into her palm hard enough to hurt, needing the pain to keep her from overplaying the fear. Then tell me what to do. Where are you? Not at home. Obviously. He let the words sit there, lightly mocking. Are you alone? Emily looked at Reyes, then away, as if looking at him might contaminate the lie. Yes. Corbett gave a small hum, thinking. She could hear faint movement on his end. Maybe car noise. Maybe a room with other people being careful. Bring what you found to the lower-level parking garage at Street Agnes, he said. Level C, East Stairwell. In 20 minutes. Brooks's head lifted at the hospital name, but her face did not change. Reyes was already typing. Emily forced a hitch into her breathing. Agnes? Corbett chuckled, genuinely amused. Because Marcus was. Because scared people move toward the first story that makes emotional sense. Because you're more predictable than you think. Emily felt a flash of hatred so pure it clarified her. She kept her voice frayed. If I do this, my daughter is done being part of it. Your daughter was always only part of your husband's bad arithmetic. We can correct that. Emily nearly lost the performance then, because the sentence was so obscene in its composure that she wanted to spit back every human word she had left. Instead, she said, I want proof Ben is alive. Silence. Not long, but long enough to mean something. When Corbett answered, his tone had cooled a degree. You are not currently in a position to negotiate for extras. He's my husband. Is he? The word hit with surgical cruelty. Corbett had either seen the contents of that lockbox before or understood people too well. Emily's face went hot. She hated that he knew where to cut. 20 minutes, he repeated. Come alone. Bring the drive and all paper copies. If you involve anyone else, I'll know before you cross the elevator threshold. The line went dead. Emily lowered the phone slowly and became aware of the blood rushing in her ears. Reyes was already moving, murmuring into his own phone, issuing instructions in clipped phrases that sounded too calm to belong to anything safe. Brooks crossed to the door, opened it a crack, spoke to someone in the hallway, then shut it again. For 10 seconds, the room turned into orchestrated motion around Emily while she remained still at the center, like the eye of something violent and man-made. Then Brooks came to kneel in front of her chair, not maternal, not soft, just direct. Look at me, she said. Emily did. He chose the garage because he thinks he controls the hospital footprint. That means he's confident, not careful. Confidence makes people visible, but visibility creates danger in both directions. If anything feels wrong before you reach the stairwell, you break script and get loud. Hospitals hate scenes. Use that. Emily gave a tiny nod. And if he brings Ben? Brooks's eyes shifted once, briefly, toward Reyes, then back. Then the operation changes. But your priorities do not. Sophie first. Yes. Emily swallowed. I don't know if I can see him and stay on script. You don't need to stay married, Brooks said. You need to stay functional. The sentence landed with such brutal usefulness that Emily almost smiled despite herself. Reyes came back to the table and set down a clear evidence bag containing the USB drive and several photocopied sheets from the envelope. You hand over this bag, he said. Not the originals, not the cash. Your phone stays on, microphone live. You keep it in your right coat pocket. You do not let him move you into a vehicle. You do not descend a second stairwell, enter a service corridor, or accept any new instructions unless you hear my voice directly in your earpiece. He held up a tiny skin-colored receiver. Emily stared at it. You had that ready awfully fast. We've been hoping for a faster break than this one, he said, not hoping for Marcus to go through a windshield. He stepped closer and gently tucked the receiver behind her ear, threading the wire under her hair with surprising care. His fingers were steady. Hers were not. Can you hear me? He asked. A faint crackle, then his voice inside her ear, intimate and disembodied. Now? Emily nodded. Yeah, good. Brooks handed her a fresh hospital visitor badge with a barcode and the name Emily Sullivan printed in block letters. In case anyone glances. Emily clipped it to her coat without comment. There was no room left for irony. Reyes checked the time again. We move in 2 minutes. Emily rose. The room seemed sharper now, edges more defined. Every object catalogued by her nervous system as if detail could prevent catastrophe. The coffee cup ring on the table. The frayed corner of the couch cushion. A vent rattling faintly overhead. Her own reflection in the dark window, paler than usual, hair damp and untamed, face older than it had been that morning. She thought suddenly, irrationally, of the last ordinary argument she and Ben had before he disappeared. Something stupid about the dishwasher, about him leaving bowls on the top rack where water pooled. She had snapped, I am not the only adult in this house. and he had looked at her with such tiredness that she read it as annoyance. Now she wondered if it had been shame. The question arrived too late to matter and still cut anyway. "Emily," Reyes said in her ear and in the room at the same time. "Stay with us." She looked at him. "I am with you." It was true enough to function and false enough to hurt, because she was also with Sophie, with Luke, in some terrible new involuntary way, with the version of Ben she no longer knew where to place, except perhaps among the weak men who confuse secrecy with sacrifice. Brooks opened the door. The hallway outside looked unchanged from minutes ago, quiet and beige and deceptively ordinary. But now Emily saw subtle alterations. A janitor's cart positioned too conveniently near the elevators, a middle-aged man reading a newspaper upside down, a nurse at the station touching her earpiece when Brooks emerged. The machinery had already formed around her. She stepped into it. The elevator ride down was shared with an elderly couple and a transport orderly pushing an empty wheelchair, none of whom knew they were descending inside a trap. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The old man coughed twice into a handkerchief. The woman beside him smelled faintly of lavender lotion and cigarettes. Emily held the evidence bag in one hand and her visitor badge between two fingers of the other, as if she were exactly what she looked like, a worried relative walking toward some private grief. When the elderly couple exited on 2, the orderly on 1, Emily continued down alone to the parking garage level. Reyes's voice came softly through the earpiece. "Remember the path. Elevator left, painted blue line on concrete, east stairwell. If Corbett deviates, stall." The doors opened. Cold air met her first, cooler than the hospital above, carrying the smell of oil, damp cement, and old exhaust. The garage lighting was sparse, fluorescent tubes humming over broad concrete lanes where shadows pooled around support columns. Somewhere water dripped in patient, echoing intervals. A red sedan idled 3 rows over with no driver visible. Emily stepped out, shoes clicking too loudly on the painted floor, and turned left toward the blue line. Every instinct in her body screamed that public spaces at night were lies, that open sightlines did not equal safety, that concrete only amplified fear. She walked anyway, forcing her pace into something neither hurried nor hesitant. Past a white pickup, past a row of employee parking signs, past an abandoned shopping bag caught under a tire. Her heart beat so hard she could feel the wire behind her ear moving with it. The east stairwell door came into view at the far end, painted institutional green, a sliver of yellow light glowing beneath it. Then a man stepped from behind a support pillar halfway between Emily and the stairwell. Not Corbett. Officer Reynolds. Out of uniform now. In a gray quarter zip and dark slacks. Notepad gone. Sympathy gone with it. His face flatter and meaner in the hard garage light. He lifted one hand, palm out, almost casual. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "you should have taken my advice and found somewhere else to stay." Emily stopped 3 paces short of him and felt every layer of the garage at once. The cold seeping up through the soles of her shoes, the fluorescent lights flattening color out of the concrete, the echo of distant engines filtering down the ramps, the sour trace of motor oil and brake dust trapped in damp air, and beneath all of it, the violent precision of her own body. Heartbeat hammering against ribs, breath measured by force, fingers pinching the evidence bag so tightly the plastic creaked. Reynolds stood with the relaxed posture of a man who believed the ending had already been negotiated, somewhere above his pay grade. He had removed the costume of public service, but not its habits. His chin lifted slightly when he spoke, as if he were still addressing a witness. "You're scared," he said. "That's understandable. Hand me the bag and I'll make sure tonight ends better than it should." In her ear, Reyes's voice arrived low and controlled. "Stall. 2 more positions, not yet visible." Emily kept her eyes on Reynolds and felt a strange, exhausted clarity settle over her. All night men had been telling her what kind of fear she was allowed to have, what price it should command, what behavior it should produce. Be quiet, be useful, be manageable. She could hear a car somewhere on an upper level rolling slowly over the seams in the concrete. A hollow, rhythmic thunk, thunk, thunk. Reynolds took 1 step closer. "Mrs. Miller, you're not wearing a badge," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Reynolds's mouth twitched. "Do I need one?" "No," Emily said. "I already know what you are." Something hardened behind his eyes. A small reveal. There, and gone. "Then let's stop wasting each other's time." The east stairwell door opened behind him with a metal groan. Daniel Corbett emerged in the yellow wedge of stairwell light. Camel coat gone now. Wearing a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit. One hand bare, the other holding the elbow of a man Emily recognized before her mind. Let the recognition fully form. Ben. For one disorienting instant he seemed both exactly himself and entirely wrong, as if someone had built him out of memory but missed crucial details. He was thinner, his face had collapsed inward at the cheeks. One eye was ringed in yellowing purple, a healing bruise dragging age across his features. His lower lip was split. His left hand was wrapped in gauze, stained faintly brown near the knuckles. But it was unquestionably him, alive and vertical and breathing, and the sight of him hit Emily with such force that the garage seemed to tilt. Ben looked at her, and the expression on his face was not relief. It was shame so naked it almost passed for illness. "Emily," he said, and the sound of her name in his mouth after 11 days felt obscene. In her ear, Reyes said, "Do not move toward him." Emily barely heard him. Every nerve in her body wanted opposite things. Run to him, hit him, demand answers, turn away. Her marriage, which had already shattered privately in files and photographs and whispered explanations, now reappeared in the flesh with bruises on it, making the ruin harder to categorize. Corbett kept hold of Ben's elbow, not theatrically, just enough to communicate ownership. "There," he said softly, "proof of life. I'm a man of my word when it suits the evening." Emily dragged air into her lungs and found her voice through the chaos. "You look terrible," she said to Ben. It was not the sentence she expected to say. It was the most truthful one available. Ben's gaze dropped for half a beat, then came back to hers. "You shouldn't be here." Emily almost laughed. "That's your opening line?" Reynolds shifted slightly to her left, tightening the triangle. Corbett glanced toward him without turning his head. "Patience." Then to Emily. "The bag." She lifted it a fraction but did not extend it. "I want him to come with me." Corbett's expression suggested she had asked for a weather adjustment. "No. Then I walk." Reynolds' shoulders tensed, the first clear crack in his composure. Corbett simply studied her. "You are not in a position to improvise conditions." "That's funny," Emily said. "Seems like I'm the only reason everyone's standing here instead of shooting each other from behind columns." Behind her own words, her thoughts were racing with brutal speed. Ben alive changes everything. No, not everything. He could still be complicit. He could still be lying. He could still be leverage wearing your husband's face. Yet his stare held something she had not seen in months, maybe years, not love, not exactly, but the absence of maneuvering. He looked like a man who had run out of places to hide inside himself. Corbett released Ben's elbow, and Ben swayed almost imperceptibly, like his equilibrium had become political property. "Talk to your wife," Corbett said. "Convince her." Ben swallowed, the movement visible all the way from where Emily stood. "Give him the drive," he said, and his voice was rougher than she remembered, as though he had spent days not using it or using it badly. Please." She stared at him. So much history lived in those two syllables. From kitchen mornings and minivan arguments, and quiet apologies after funerals. From the mouth of a man who had lied to her for nearly 2 decades. The endearment landed like contamination. "Don't call me that," she said. Ben flinched. It was small, real, involuntary. Corbett watched both of them with clinical interest. "The domestic portion of the evening is moving me deeply," he said, "but not usefully." In her ear, Reyes murmured, "East ramp clear. Wait." Emily heard movement now. She had not registered before. A subtle squeal of rubber somewhere far right. The scrape of a metal door closing on another level, the building itself beginning to fill with intention. Corbett heard it too. His eyes shifted once, just enough. "You brought company," he said. Not to Reynolds, to Emily. She let fear into her face because at this point it no longer required acting. "I brought what you asked for." Corbett smiled without warmth. "And a microphone, I suspect." Reynolds moved fast then, too fast for deliberation, lunging toward her coat pocket. Emily jerked backward on instinct, and his hand grazed fabric instead of flesh. The evidence bag slipped in her fingers. Reynolds grabbed for it. Emily swung her other hand up blindly, pepper spray already in her palm. Denise's pink keychain absurdly bright under the garage light, and she sprayed straight into his face. Reynolds screamed, not shouted, screamed, a raw, animal sound, as he stumbled back, clawing at his eyes. Everything broke at once. Reyes's voice exploded in her ear. "Down!" Corbett shoved Ben sideways and reached inside his coat. Emily dropped hard to one knee behind the red sedan just as gunfire cracked through the garage, deafening in the concrete chamber. The back window of the sedan burst inward above her with a shower of safety glass that rained into her hair and down the collar of her coat in cold, sparkling grains. Tires shrieked from somewhere beyond the support columns. Men shouted. A second volley hit the pillar near Reynolds, spitting chips of concrete. Emily flattened herself against the car's tire, every muscle locking so violently it hurt. The evidence bag was still in her hand. Ben was somewhere to her right, Corbett somewhere ahead. None of it organized into strategy, only proximity and sound and terror. She heard Reynolds coughing, swearing, half-blind. Then a voice with command in it, not Reyes, amplified through the garage. "Federal agents, drop your weapon." Another shot answered. Emily risked lifting her head an inch. Corbett was moving toward the stairwell, one hand on Ben's jacket collar, gun low at his side. Ben stumbled, twisted, and for one blazing second their eyes met across the hood of the sedan. Emily saw it then, not as absolution but as fact. He had chosen something. Maybe too late. Maybe badly. But he was no longer moving with Corbett. He was being dragged by him. Ben shoved backward with his wrapped hand, throwing his weight in the opposite direction. Corbett lost his grip for half a beat. Ben shouted, "Emily, run!" The same word Marcus had used, the same impossible command. Corbett swung the gun toward Ben in reflexive fury, and Emily moved before thought. She came up from behind the sedan, grabbed the loose aluminum parking sign bolted crookedly to the concrete at the end of the row, tore it free with a screech of metal, and hurled it with both hands. It did not hit Corbett cleanly, but it clipped his forearm hard enough to disrupt the shot. The bullet slammed into the concrete floor instead of Ben's chest, sparks spraying. Then agents were everywhere, shapes in dark jackets rushing from behind columns and through service doors, weapons up, voices layered over one another. Reynolds was face down with a knee in his back, still screaming about his eyes. Corbett pivoted toward the stairwell, saw his angles collapsing, and did something Emily would remember in pieces for the rest of her life. He caught Ben by the back of the neck, dragged him tight against his own body, and jammed the barrel under Ben's jaw. The whole garage seemed to stop breathing. Even the echo changed. "Back off," Corbett said. He was no longer smooth. Rage had roughened him, stripped the varnish from his voice. Everybody back the hell off. Ben's face was rigid with pain, throat exposed to the gun, one bruised cheek shining with sweat under the fluorescence. Emily rose slowly from her crouch without realizing she was doing it. "No," Reyes said sharply, from somewhere left of her. She barely heard him. She could see only Ben, not the husband from the photographs or the liar from the file folders. Not the father divided between houses, just a man held at the seam between his sins and their cost. Ben found her eyes again. Something passed through his expression then, quick and complex and devastatingly plain. Not a request for forgiveness. He knew better than that. It was recognition of what he had done, of what he had risked, of what she would have to carry because of him. Corbett backed toward the stairwell door, hauling Ben with him, gun fixed, breathing fast now. "You think any of this holds in court?" he shouted at Reyes. "You think half your people aren't already bought?" Reyes stepped into Emily's peripheral vision. Weapon lowered but ready, voice even. "Maybe, maybe not. You're still done." Corbett laughed once, cracked and contemptuous. "That optimism is adorable." He pushed the stairwell bar with his shoulder. The door gave an inch. Ben moved. The motion was so small Emily almost missed it. He dropped his weight straight down and back, not away from the gun but into it, using his whole body to pin Corbett's arm high for one impossible second. The shot went off into the ceiling. Agents lunged. Corbett tried to recover, but Ben twisted with a desperation born of either courage or exhaustion beyond fear, and the two men crashed sideways through the partially open stairwell door. Emily heard the sickening impact of bodies on metal stairs, the clatter of the gun skidding. Then, three things happened almost simultaneously. Agents surged into the stairwell. Reynolds began shouting that he'd make a deal, and someone caught Emily around the shoulders from behind because her body had already launched toward the door. It was Brooks. She held Emily with unexpected force. "No, Ben, no." Emily fought for half a second, then the sounds from inside the stairwell rearranged her resistance. A heavy thud, a man groaning, another voice yelling, "Weapon secure," then silence, followed by the clipped cadence of medical triage. Brooks loosened her grip but did not fully release her. Emily stood trembling in the center of the garage while everything rushed around her. Agents hauled Reynolds upright, his face streaming tears and mucus from the spray. One eye squeezed shut, the other red and ruined looking. He kept talking, too fast now, names spilling out in self-protection. A paramedic team appeared from nowhere, as if hospitals breed them in the walls. Reyes emerged from the stairwell at last, breathing hard, tie gone crooked. For one terrible heartbeat, Emily read the answer on his face as death. Then he said, "Corbett's in custody." She stared at him. "And Ben?" Reyes hesitated. "Not long. Long enough. He's alive." The relief that hit her was so sharp it felt like injury, and she hated it instantly. Hated that her body still knew how to want him breathing. Hated that love, once trained into a system, does not exit on command when presented with evidence. "Shot?" she asked. Reyes shook his head. No. Fall. Possible cervical injury. They're bringing him up. Emily did not realize she was crying until she tasted salt. Not sobbing, just tears leaking without permission, her nervous system refusing to distinguish between grief and adrenaline. Brooks put a hand at the center of her back, not consoling, just anchoring. The stairwell door burst open again and the trauma team rolled Ben out on a backboard. Collar braced around his neck, oxygen mask over his face, one arm strapped down, eyes open but glassy with pain. He turned his head as far as the collar allowed when they passed her. "Sophie?" he rasped behind the mask. Emily stepped closer before anyone could stop her. "Safe," she said. The word nearly failed on the way out. Ben shut his eyes for 1 second, as if struck by it. When he opened them again, he looked straight at her with an expression so raw it stripped years off him. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology was inadequate. Obscenely inadequate. It did not cover the hidden child, the money, the danger, the lies folded into tax returns and bedtime routines and the architecture of an ordinary life. It did not cover the fact that Sophie had spent part of this night under armed escort because her father had mistaken secret suffering for moral complexity. Yet for all its inadequacy, the apology was the first unarmored thing he had offered her in a very long time. Emily stood over him in the harsh garage light with federal agents and medics and concrete dust all around them, and discovered that what she felt was not forgiveness. It was mourning. Mourning for the marriage she thought she had, for the man he might have been if shame had not ruled him, for the version of herself that had kept interpreting distance as fatigue, because the alternative was too destabilizing to admit. "Stay alive," she said. It was not mercy. It was a sentence. Ben seemed to understand. His eyes closed as they rolled him away toward the elevators. The garage gradually changed from battlefield to evidence scene. Casings were marked, photographs taken. Reynolds, now cuffed and quieter, was led past without meeting Emily's eyes. Corbett went by last, wrists restrained in front, hair disordered, one cheek split open from the stairwell fall. His composure finally broken into something uglier and more ordinary. He looked at Emily as two agents guided him toward a separate exit. "This won't end clean," he said. She looked back at him through drying tears and said, "I know." It was the truest answer she had left, because even as the machinery of consequence closed around him, nothing in her own life was closing neatly. Luke still existed. Renee still existed. Sophie would wake tomorrow into a world altered by adult cowardice and violence she had not chosen. Ben might live and face charges, or live and never walk right again, or live long enough only to be useful in court. Marcus Hale lay upstairs between survival and something less. Public stories would be written, some of them false, some of them accurate in ways that still failed the human facts. Hours later, after statements and sealed corridors and a reunion with Sophie in a pediatric observation room where the lights were kept soft and the blankets had cartoon moons on them, Emily sat in a vinyl chair beside her sleeping daughter and watched the steady rise and fall of the girl's small chest. Sophie had cried hard for 10 minutes when she finally saw her mother, then harder when exhaustion gave grief permission, then fallen asleep mid-sentence with one fist twisted in Emily's sleeve. Dawn began leaking pale gray around the edges of the drawn blinds. The hospital sounded different at that hour, less acute, more worn, carts rolling, shift changes, coffee being poured for people who would spend the morning explaining the night. Brooks had come by once to say Marcus was still critical, but stable enough for hope. Reyes had come by once to say Corbett was talking, Reynolds was bargaining, and the drive had opened enough doors that not everyone would escape into paperwork this time. Then they had both left her alone because they understood, or at least respected, that some forms of damage cannot be processed in conference. Emily sat with Sophie and thought about Luke Donnelly in a house she had never seen, and about Renee, who would soon learn that the architecture around her life had collapsed too. She thought about Ben asking only one thing before slipping behind the oxygen mask in medical hands. Sophie? Not Emily. Not himself. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it was still too little. Both could be true. The morning light strengthened, turning the room from shelter into ordinary hospital again, and Emily understood that when Sophie woke, the work would begin in a different register: lawyers, testimony, careful explanations scaled to a child, the impossible task of deciding what version of her father Sophie could live with. There would be no clean inheritance from this night. Only choices. Only consequences. Only the slow rebuilding of a life that now had to include truths she never consented to carry. She lowered her head beside Sophie's hand, closed her burning eyes for one brief moment, and let herself feel the full, unsorted weight of being alive after the worst part, knowing the worst part was not really over, only changed shape.